The existence of human wants is the basis of all economic activities in a society. In economics, all desires, tastes and motives of human beings are called wants. Wants may arise due to elementary and psychological causes, social causes, customs and habits, advertisements, etc. In economics, wants are classified into three categories: necessaries, comforts and luxuries. Necessaries refers to the thing without which we cannot exist. These are things like water, food, clothing and shelter. After satisfying our necessaries, we may desire a few things more. A table and a chair for a student help him to increase the efficiency of his learning is an example. But a costly cushioned chair is a comfort. Luxury means superfluous consumption. After acquiring a few comforts, man then desires luxuries. Luxuries are not very essential. We can live without them. Examples are gold, silver, costly furniture and such things. Let's go on to see what utility means. Utility means the level of satisfaction which people derive from the consumption of a commodity. Utility is a subjective concept. Different people derive different level of utility from a given good. A person may derive 100% satisfaction from drinking coffee, while another may not receive any satisfaction at all. Utility from the economic point of view is said to be ethically neutral because even harmful items like cigarettes, alcohol, etc. are in demand as people want them. Thus, the concept of utility does not distinguish between harmful and non-harmful objects. Utility can be classified as total utility and marginal utility. Total utility is the utility obtained by the consumer from the consumption of all the units at a given time. Marginal utility is the utility derived by the consumer by consuming an additional unit at a given time. There are two approaches to the analysis of utility: the cardinal approach and the ordinal approach. Under cardinal approach, we have two theories: the law of diminishing marginal utility and consumer surplus. Under the ordinal approach, we have only one theory, the indifference curve analysis. Cardinal approach was developed by Alfred Marshall. According to this approach, utility is a measurable and quantifiable aspect. The ordinal approach was developed by J.R. Hicks and R.J.D. Allen. According to this approach, utility is not measurable but comparable. For example, consumers can say that they give first preference to pizzas, second to burgers, and so on. This cardinal approach supports a few assumptions. 1. The cardinal measurability of utility. Second, the constancy of the marginal utility of money. And 3. The hypothesis of independent utility. The concepts studied under cardinal approach are the law of diminishing marginal utility, consumer surplus, and the law of equimarginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility says with increase in consumption, satisfaction keeps decreasing. Let's say Manish wishes to eat lots of chocolate. He eats the first chocolate, then the second, then the third, and so on until he feels satiated and stops consuming them. The satisfaction Manish derived from the first chocolate was higher than what he derived from the second or third subsequent ones. Thus, as a consumer consumes more and more units of a good, the intensity of his want for the good goes on decreasing to a point where he no longer wants it. Let us take a hypothetical example to understand the relation between MU and TU. Let's say Raghu consumes 1 idli and gets a marginal utility of 20. In this case, the total utility is also 20. With the increase in consumption, MU goes on decreasing as depicted in table. TU is the sum of marginal utilities. It is evident that when MU is positive, TU increases. When MU is 0, TU is at maximum. And when MU is negative, TU decreases. There are some exceptions or limitations to the law of diminishing marginal utility. This law is not applicable to such things like money, rare collections like coins, intoxicants, etc. Consumer surplus is simply the difference between the price that one is willing to pay and the price that the consumer actually pays for the product. The amount of money a consumer is willing to spend on a good indicates the utility he derives from it. What he actually pays is price. Hence, in economic terms, consumer surplus is equal to marginal utility minus price. Let's say Vinod watches a movie by buying a ticket for Rs 50. He is very satisfied with the movie. He felt he might have been willing even to pay Rs 80 for the movie. In this example, consumer surplus is 80 minus 50, which is equal to 30. Let us look at this table. When the quantity is 1, MU is 100 and price is 50. In this case, consumer surplus is 50. When the quantity is 2, MU is 75 and price is still 50. Hence, consumer surplus is 25. When the quantity is 3, MU is 50 and price will still be 50. Here, consumer surplus is 0. The point where MU is equal to price and consumer surplus is 0 is called the equilibrium point. Beyond this point, the consumer will not consume anymore as consumer surplus is negative. Now, let us look at the graphical presentation of consumer surplus. Take quantity on the x-axis and MU and price on the y-axis. As price is constant, the price line will be horizontal and parallel to the x-axis. As MU goes on decreasing, MU slopes downwards. The point where the price line and MU line intersect each other is called the equilibrium point. From the table, it is evident that consumer surplus is prevalent only before the equilibrium quantity. Hence, the area of consumer surplus is above the price line and below the MU line. Now, let us learn about the ordinal approach in difference curve analysis. To understand the concept, it is very important to understand its assumptions. Here they are. 1. According to this approach, satisfaction is not measurable. It is only comparable. 2. The prices of goods remain constant. 3. The consumer is rational. 4. The consumer is interested in buying two commodities in combinations. And 5. The consumer spends all his income. We now come to the indifference schedule. Let us take a hypothetical example of a few combinations of pizza and burgers which give the same level of satisfaction. Let us plot the same data on the graph and look at the graphical representation of an indifference curve. X-axis shows pizzas and y-axis shows burgers. Let us plot each combination. A gives you 1 pizza and 12 burgers. B gives you 2 pizzas and 6 burgers. and so on, C gives you 3 pizzas and 4 burgers. Joining all combinations, A, B, C and D on the graph gives you indifference curve. Please note, various combinations on the indifference curve will give the same level of satisfaction. Let us move on to marginal rate of substitution. The rate at which one commodity is substituted for another to maintain the same level of satisfaction is called the marginal rate of substitution. Let us take the same indifference schedule of our previous example. Here, we see that the consumer derived the same level of satisfaction from 1 pizza and 12 burgers as he derived from 2 pizzas and 6 burgers. The consumer gave up 6 burgers for an additional pizza. So, the marginal rate of substitution is 6. Further, if the consumer gives up an additional 2 units of burgers and gains another unit of pizzas for the same satisfaction level, the marginal rate of substitution is 2. Similarly, for the next case, the marginal rate of substitution is 1. As the consumer moves from the combination A to B to C to D, he has to give up some units of burgers in order to have an additional unit of pizza. This is known as the rate of substitution, as the units of burgers are substituted for that of pizzas. We notice that the MRS is falling, that is, as the consumer gets more and more units of pizzas, he is willing to forego less and less units of burgers. 1. The law of diminishing marginal utility operates, that is, as the consumer gets more of a good, his intensity of want for it decreases. And 2. Most goods are imperfect substitutes of others. If they could substitute one another perfectly, MRS would remain constant. And now, the indifference map. The indifference map is the combination of many indifference curves on the same diagram. It shows the scale of consumers' preferences for 2 goods. Graphically, it can be shown like this. What are the properties of indifference curves? 1. Indifference curves slope downwards from left to right, that is, they have a negative slope. 2. An indifference curve is convex to the origin. 3. An indifference curve drawn to the right of an existing indifference curve represents greater satisfaction. 4. No 2 indifference curves intersect each other. 5. Indifference curves should not touch either the x or the y-axis. Let's now see what the budget line is. As discussed earlier, an indifference curve to the right represents greater amount of satisfaction. So, a consumer always tries to achieve the highest indifference curve. But the constraint to reach this point is the budget. Hence, the concept of the budget line is very important. The budget line is a downward sloping curve. If a point is on the budget line, it represents full utilization of income. If a point is below the budget line, it represents underutilization of resources. If a point is above the budget line, it represents borrowing. And this brings us to consumer equilibrium. Let us plot budget line and indifference map on the same graph. Here, we see that on the budget line, there are 5 points A, B, S, C and D. All these points indicate full utilization of income. But of these 5 points, point S is on a slightly higher indifference curve. Therefore, out of the 5 combinations, S is better. This point is called the equilibrium point. At this point, the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line, and the slope of the budget line is equal to the slope of the indifference curve.